whole town standing about Cincinnati. What a team, what a team, what a team. And the lady from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Hey, Reds fans, this is Jack Greiner, and along with Randy Freaking, we're here with the We Love Our Team podcast. And today we're pleased to welcome Greg Rhodes to the podcast. Greg is a lifelong Reds fan, grew up in Richmond, Indiana. He's a prolific author who's written extensively about the Reds. His books include Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame Highlights, Cincinnati's Crosley Field, the Red Leg Journal, Red Leg Memories, and the Big Red Dynasty. Greg was named the executive director of the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame and Museum when it opened in 2004 and served in that capacity until retiring from that position in July of 2007. Greg has continued to serve as a Cincinnati Reds team historian and remains active in speaking engagements regarding the history of Reds baseball. So, Greg, welcome to our podcast.
Well, thanks, Jack. I really appreciate you and Randy having me on.
We don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to go ahead and presume you're a lifelong Reds fan. Is that a fair assumption?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I grew up, as you said, in Richmond, which is about 60 miles or so north of, a little northwest of Cincinnati. And we were definitely in the Reds orbit. We got the Reds on radio. The morning newspaper always carried the Reds games. When TV came along there in the mid-late 50s, you started seeing more Reds games on TV. We, of course, got all the games through either through a Cincinnati or Dayton station that we could get. So, yeah, I was a Reds fan all the way along. And in fact, my one early claim to fame with the Reds is that when I was playing youth baseball at the age of 8 or 9, I was on a team called the Crosley Management Company or Corporation because the Crosley Corporation had an office, had a company, a manufacturing plant in Richmond, and they started a little league baseball team. I was on the Crosley team.
Okay. Was that Little League or was it Knot Hole? Do you recall?
No, it was little. That was it was Richmond's equivalent of Little League. It was not a Knot Hole. It wasn't under the Knot Hole umbrella.
Okay. Yeah. I think Knot Hole was Knot Hole just pretty much Cincinnati. Was that?
I think so. I mean, it goes all the way back to the 30s at least. And I don't know if there were other novels outside the greater Cincinnati, sort of out of the inner Red circle here. If there were novel programs outside of that, but I mean, it certainly was an extraordinarily popular youth baseball program in Cincinnati, no question about that.
Yeah, it sure was.
Greg, I know my brother's got straight A tickets from Knot Hole baseball. Did they extend that up to Richmond?
No, and I wouldn't have gotten them anyway.
Well, I didn't either. Jack, how about you? You probably got straight A tickets.
I got my straight A tickets. I worked very hard. It was always one quarter. I think it was like the winter quarter, and I always really buckled down because I wanted to get my straight A tickets. I think at one point you would get 2 tickets to 3 games. I think. I mean, if I'm correct.
No, I think I remember that. My brother's got them.
They took you along. So
that's right.
you needed to really study. So, Greg, what position did you play in youth baseball?
Oh, man, I was a really good little middle infielder, third baseman.
Okay.
My baseball career peaked at about age 10 or 11. I didn't really have that growth spurt until a lot later. And so kids were getting bigger. The ball was moving faster, starting to curve a little bit. I mean, the game got pretty fast for me as a kid. And so I quit playing after. I think I played a little bit of 13 and 14, like American Legion ball in the summertime, but that was about it. I didn't play in high school.
Okay. So when you were a kid and you're out there playing, who did you imagine yourself to be?
Well, you always imagine yourself to be Ted Kluszewski, but that was not going to happen. That was not going to happen for me. I wasn't going to be Clue or Frank Robinson. That was not going to happen. So I was sort of stuck with Roy McMillan, who was the Red shortstop in the 50s. And when I went to Reds fantasy camp a few years ago, I picked the number 11. Like people thought it was for Larkin, but no, it was actually for Roy McMillan. It was, kind of growing up, he was the guy for me.
We talked with John Arardi about the Reds, like the legacy of shortstops, in that almost 50-year period where it was McMillan, Cardenas, Concepcion, and Larkin, and just what a remarkable to have just four guys really in that period. And Woody Woodward was in there, I guess, for a little bit, but yeah, it's just
now maybe Dela Cruz will start another run. Who knows?
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Greg, what do you do as the official Reds historian?
Well, as I always say, Randy, that is the setup for me to not know a question that you're going to ask me. I always figure that's what being Reds historian means. There's someone's going to ask you a question and you're not going to know the answer. Since I retired from the Reds Hall of Fame, I wanted to continue to do some work for the Reds. They wanted me to do some things. And so, but it really had very little to do with sort of official historian things. It had more to do with speaking engagements, and I started doing the Reds highlights on radio, and I'd worked with the Hall of Fame a little bit, sometimes on some of their exhibits with them, and some things like that. But it didn't. There was no sort of Reds story, there's this thing that people want to know the answer to. What do you? I mean, every once in a while I get a question like that. But you guys have hooked this night us over to Reds Hall of Fame. I think you probably know Chris. He's been a curator over there for about 20, 25 years. And to tell you the truth, when a question comes up, I often say, I got to call Chris.
Well, do you have your phone handy? Because I've got a question for you.
I do have my phone handy, but that's what I'm...
one of my favorite books you wrote was this one right here.
Yeah.
It's entitled Baseball Revolutionaries. It's a story about the 1869 Red Stockings. Now, do you see the Red Stockings on there, Greg?
Yeah.
So here's my question. Do you know who designed that uniform, that very first Red Stockings uniform?
Wow, I just know that they started wearing it in 1868, the year before they went professional. And there was a woman who was a seamstress who was supposedly, sewed the uniforms. I don't know if she designed it or not. I take it you do. Do you have an answer for that?
I do. I just found out a couple hours ago. If you Google George Ellard, Cincinnati Reds,
yeah.
He came up with the idea of the Red Stockings.
George Ellard gets credit for some of the uniform, notions. Harry Wright does too. He was part of that. George Ellard ran a sporting goods store in Cincinnati, and it was probably the first sporting goods store. I mean, after all, there really wasn't a lot of sporting goods equipment to sell before baseball. Right. I don't even think they were wearing gloves in boxing. I mean, you had boxing, you had lawn croquet, and you had a little bit of cricket being played here in Cincinnati. But, if you started a sporting goods store, baseball would have been one of the main things you would have done in the early days.
I read this morning or a couple hours ago that his sporting goods store was right down by the present location of Great American Ballpark.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was in that downtown core back then, yeah. I mean, those were horse and buggy days.
Right.
So do you remember your first game, Trey, that you went to?
First Reds game would have been in the mid-50s. And I really don't recall the very first game. I do remember coming down with that Little League team a couple of times. The coaches would, put together a little caravan and we'd come down. And I remember one of the very first autographs, probably the very first autograph I got. Here we were, little 8, 9-year-old kids hanging around close to the dugout down at Crosley Field. And I got an autograph from a guy named Tom Acker, pitcher, who I think was with the Reds very, very briefly, and I really don't know exactly what happened to him. And I have no idea whatever happened to that autograph. But that was the first autograph that I can remember getting. But in those early days, the other memories I have of going to Crosley Field were going down with my family. My dad was a big fan, and he would get tickets to Crosley Field a couple times a year. We'd drive down from Richmond down US 27. You'd come in on Spring Grove Avenue down towards where the ballpark was in the West End, and coming down, especially for a night game, and seeing those lights.
Yeah.
You could see them, from a mile or so away. You start to see the lights. That was a great memory.
Yeah, that was before I-75 was built. I don't think I-75 was built until the mid '60s.
That's right.
I've seen pictures of it being constructed,
Yeah.
beyond the outfield wall.
Yeah, and that led to a couple of very interesting changes in the ballpark, because the lights on as the freeway was being constructed, and they had it up on that berm, elevated a little bit, and the construction lights from the equipment and the reverse cars that would start driving up there, they shone in the batter's eyes. The batter, the catcher, the umpire were distracted by it. And this was I think in the '64 season. And the Reds went on the road, and when they came back, they had constructed a 8 to 10 foot high wooden fence that sat above the old concrete fence out in center field to block the lights.
Wow.
And they kept the home run line atop the old cement wall. That's where the yellow line was.
Yeah.
But the wooden extension above that was a home run. So if the ball hit the wooden extension, it was a home run. And that led to a very famous moment on Yogiism. Yogi Berra was coaching for the Mets. This is like 65, 66. And I think it was Ron Swoboda. I can't remember how to pronounce it.
Votto, yeah.
Yeah, Swoboda. Hit what Yogi thought and was a home run. He went over the cement, over the yellow line, and hit the wooden extension. And the umpires, they called it in play, that it hit the cement wall and bounced back. Yogi came out to argue that it had hit the wooden barrier, it hadn't hit the cement wall, and he concluded his argument with the phrase, with the expression, "Well, if you can't hear that difference, you must be blind."
That's great. That is great. Oh my God.
A good Yogi from Crosley Field.
Oh man.
Wooden extension was up there for the rest of the time that they played at Crosley, and in about '67 or so, when Bob Howsam came in to run the club, he changed it so that the yellow line, that the home run line moved all the way up over the wooden. Well, you had to hit it now all the way over the wooden extension. So that made that home run to center field. You had to hit it 10 feet higher.
Interesting. Did you see, just speaking of Yogi, have you seen the documentary about him on Netflix?
I didn't. I had not seen it. A number of people told me about it. I guess
great.
Understand it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. And, they do a great job of, letting you know what a great ball player he was. Because I think sometimes we think about the Yogiisms and that sort of thing and lose sight of what a tremendous player.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you go, Jack? When were your first games in the?
In the '60s, the mid '60s. I was born in '58, so I was, 6, 7 years old. I tell the story that I think one of my first games was I think Pete Rose hit a home run. I just vaguely remember that, and then Randy and I have talked about Tressler Comet bat days. Going down and getting the bat, making noise with it.
Did you? One of the, they had some great promotions back in the '50s and '60s. But one of them was Trumpet Night. Did you guys, you ever, you charge, charge, now that, played on the organ. Well, they were playing it on the organ. Ronnie Dale played the organ across the field, and he would do the charge, salute on the organ. And, this is right when it very first started. And Jocko Conlon, who was a famous National League umpire,
Sure.
He got so fed up with this one time. After hearing it over and over and over again, he threatened to throw Ronnie Dale out of the ballpark if he quit. He's going to quit playing that charge thing all the time. Well, the Reds, the league overruled it and said, no, charge is fine. Let them play it all they want to. And so the Reds took advantage and had trumpet night, where you could get in at a reduced price or free if you brought your trumpet. And then, for 700 people that showed up with trumpet and all around the ballpark. And I could just imagine 700 people playing charge off key, not or just randomly. This must have been great.
I think Ronnie Dale got back at those umpires by playing the song "Three Blind Mice."
Yeah,
is kind of my memory.
He could have done that. Yeah, yeah.
Who were your favorite players back in those days? My favorite player was Votto Pinson, for example.
Yeah, Votto was a great player. A lot of people really, I think, speak very fondly of him. And he died pretty early on. He wasn't that old when he passed away. I think he died in the late 90s. He wasn't. The late 1990s. But he was a great player. Frank Robinson, of course, was the star and he was the guy. If you were watching on TV, you always wanted to make sure you're watching when Robbie came up to the plate. And there's a handful of those other guys. And it's interesting. Since my time at the Hall of Fame, I didn't know any of those guys growing up or as I got older. And I didn't even live in Cincinnati until 1985. And then the beginning to know a lot of the guys that had played back in the 60s through our Hall of Fame events was a real treat, and most of those guys were just terrific guys, really easy to work with. Always said, and you guys may know this too from your experiences with players, they're a lot easier to deal with the older they get. They got older kids, they got kids in college, they got, they just get older and they get, it's not that they're not still stars, they're still stars,
Sure.
But there's a little more humility, there's a little more down to earthness about them, I think, as they get a little older. That in general, I would say that would be the case. But those guys were great to deal with. Jim Maloney, really a great guy, from those 60s teams. Tommy Helms, you remember Tommy, of course. He is a very deadpan, very funny guy. He was really great. Jim O'Toole always came to the Reds Hall of Fame events. Jim had a huge family. Jim had 11 kids, I think, which had to be a club record. I could never prove it, but it was like. Then he had, for the longest time, Jim wore number 31. Like, for the longest time, he had 31 grandkids.
Really?
Then then the last daughter screwed it up and had another kid.
Oh, well, that's great.
But for a long time,
I think a bunch of them still live in Anderson Township, I believe.
Yeah, and they would all come to opening day every year, and this big family reunion. They'd all come to opening day. Jim loved pitching opening day. He absolutely loved pitching opening day. He wanted the ball on opening day. But they did 50 or 60 O'Tooles down here for the family. 60 tickets for opening day.
Oh, yeah. Well,
how about Big Red Machine days? Who was some of your favorite players in the Big Red Machine days?
Well, Pete was, of course, Pete was, to me, the star in the show. Johnny, Bench, there's so many great players. I don't really remember having a specific favorite. I just remember that I'll tell you, Sparky was always too. Sparky became a real personality with that team. I always loved watching, Sparky, and he did a lot of interviews, and Sparky was a great force on that team as well, not a player, but that team was so great. It spoiled you, and in some ways, it makes it it's made it harder to be a fan as you got older because you kind of always comparing everything to those guys, which really isn't fair. People, you're talking about great pitchers, for example, and people are pitching. And people always go, well, Noah Ryan did it this way, or, Sandy Koufax. Well, it's not fair to compare guys always to the best guy, And it's like, sometimes we do that with the Reds. It's like, well, it's not as great as the 70s. Well, it's never going to be that good.
Right.
But it could be pretty darn good and still not be as good as the 70s. But that was such a magical era.
Yeah. You're talking about Maloney. I got to tell you the story he told one time. He pitched a game in Crosley Field against the Astros, and the leadoff hitter for the Astros, who was a Hispanic player, just wore him out. Just went 4 for 4, and Maloney could not get him out. And they were flying. Their next road trip was to Houston. And I guess Pat Corrales heard Maloney talking to Johnny Edwards about how we're going to get this guy out. He hits everything I throw up there. And Corrales said, well, I don't know if it helps, but he's definitely afraid of snakes. And so Maloney kind of files that away. And there was a novelty shop near the Astrodome. And so Maloney bought a rubber snake. And the guy like had this thing where he'd come up, he'd tap his bat on home plate, and then he'd like look up at the sky. So Edwards had the snake, and he was a leadoff hitter. Edwards, the guy taps, looks up. As he's doing that, Edwards drops his rubber snake on the plate. Throws his bat in the air, screams, run into the dugout, into the clubhouse, locks the door, will not come out. And like the umpire, whoever the manager was of the Astros, I don't know, it was Grady Hatton or whoever it was. He's like, look, if he's not going to come out, you got to substitute for him. So that's how they got the guy out of the game. But I mean, it was the best. I got to go to the Green Diamond Gallery when Jim Maloney spoke, and he was, I think of all the people I've seen at Green Diamond, he was my very favorite. He told just hilarious stories, but then he really opened up because, he struggled when he first stopped playing and, with alcohol and had a rough time, and then really got himself back together. And he was just great. I mean,
he credited Don Newcomb of all people to really kind of set him straight at one point about really moving him to a different track on that. Yeah, but Maloney, one of the best Maloney stories, there's a lot of them, but he would, we forget now, Pete would do this a lot too. Maloney, back in the 50s to 60s, the only way that the guys had to try to fight for a little higher salary was to hold out in spring training. They wouldn't sign their contract. They wouldn't show up in spring training. And Maloney did that 2 or 3 times. And one year, a pretty long holdout back in California where he lived. And Willie Mays was holding out that year too, and the two of them had played some golf together and gotten together and stuff and everything. Anyway, when Maloney comes into spring training finally, right towards the end of spring training, the guys were all asking him about, well, are you going to be in shape? Are you going to be ready to go? And Jim said, well, yeah, I'll be good. I might be a few days behind, but I'm feeling pretty good. Plus, he said, I got some tips on how to get Willie Mays out. Oh, yeah, really? He said, yeah. He said, you just tee up the ball on home plate and he can't get it out of the infield.
That's great.
What brought you to Cincinnati, Greg? You said you came in 1985. What brought you to Cincinnati?
My wife. I met Sally, and I was living in California at the time, and we always joked it was I was looking for an excuse to get back to Cincinnati, and so but native Cincinnati and moved here in '85. And then I started working very shortly after that for the Cincinnati Historical Society. And it was about the time when the Historical Society moved into the museums area in Union Terminal around the late 80s, early 90s. And so it was a very exciting time to be there because they were expanding and growing and everything. But you're also, Randy, you brought up earlier about the 1869 Red Stockings. When you're the home of professional baseball, as we build ourselves for years, you get a lot of historians, contacting wanting to come and look at stuff. And the historical society we had a few baseball related tapes and so forth, and some files. And I was the only baseball fan really kind of on staff at that time. And they'd always say, "Oh, let Greg handle it, let Greg." And so by the mid 90s, I'd become pretty familiar with a lot of the stuff that they had there. And then there was this other writer and this is a book that I think probably both of you know, a book called If I Never Get Back, a time travel novel about the old Red Stockings. And it was this author in California, Daryl Brock. I've gotten to know Daryl over the years pretty well. And Daryl had come into Cincinnati a couple of times to research that book. And I got really fascinated by that early team and the history of it. And Daryl was writing this novel. And John Arardi and I had struck up a little bit of a friendship. And we started talking about doing a nonfiction book, just a sort of an account of that team. And that's what led to our first book, which you showed, which was actually a sort of a revised version of the very first book that came out in the mid 90s. And then we did the book on Crosley Field, then we did a book on the Big Red Machine, and that's kind of how it got kicked off. And then as I was doing those books, I was getting to know some folks at the Reds, and had talked to them, and then in the late 90s, when the plans were coming on board for the new ballpark, I was asked to come in and talk a little bit about a museum concept or Hall of Fame concept, and was on part of some of the planning committees. And then when the ballpark opened, they asked me to come and run with the Hall of Fame idea. And I don't know if you remember John Allen, Carl Lindner from Large Shot, and Carl hired John Allen John had been affiliated with the Reds during the Large year too, but they had made John CEO, and John really was a big fan for the Hall of Fame during the planning process, for the new ball to make sure that there was space allocated for the Hall of Fame. And as you recall, there were the two stadiums were part of the same tax levy that passed in the mid 90s, and the Bengals Stadium went first.
Right.
And so the time the Reds got around, it's not surprising. The Bengals had gone over budget, and there was less money in the pot for the Reds, and so they had to kind of shortchange a few things in the ballpark. And the Hall of Fame was one of those things that got pushed aside. It's in that separate building right outside the ballpark for fans who've never been there, but it's right.
It's tremendous.
In block with the ballpark. And by the way, if you've not been there, and if you like museums and halls of baseball Hall of Fame, it's really one of the, humbly speaking, it is one of the best ones in all of baseball. I think the one in upstate New York, Cooperstown's probably a little bit better. Very good team Hall of Fame. And so anyway, the ballpark opened in 2003, right? 2003, yeah. Great American.
2003, yeah.
And the Hall of Fame was supposed to open, but it hadn't opened. And so when it didn't open, Linder Carl got some criticism in the press, and John Allen called me one cold morning in January, and says, "Can you come to work can you start work next week?" He said, "Carl's getting tired of getting beat up in the press about this Hall of Fame, and we're going to go ahead and move ahead with it." And so I was hired like early that January, and he said Carl wants it open before the end of the season. So we had September. We had like 9 months to get the thing open. But we had done a lot of the planning, and at the time we kind of knew what we were doing. But that was a very interesting 9 months. It was funny when I first got there. Everyone was getting ready to go to spring training down at Edgerton, Florida at that point, and on the other hand, I got to go to Green Bay, Wisconsin in February because the Packers had built a museum using the same firm that we were using, same design firm that we were using. They had roughly about the same budget, and they wanted me to go up and see the Packers Museum for some ideas. So here I am, bundled up, flying to Green Bay. Everybody else was going to Florida. But anyway, it all worked.
That's great. So were you, the time you were living away from Cincinnati, you retained your allegiance to the team? Okay. Well, that's good. That's good.
And I lived in California for a while. I lived in Honolulu for a number of years, for about 4 or 5 years. And the only time in Honolulu we ever got to listen to a Reds game. I mean, now this is like the late 70s, so they were probably on TV a couple of times, but they were on radio once. And it was because Pete was approaching the National League hit with the 39-40 games when he was about to pass the National League mark. And they carried that game live. Marty and Joe broadcasted Pete's record-breaking game. And, of course, it was on over there. It was on like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I took the afternoon off work to listen to Pete set the National League hit record.
How about other goals?
And my Reds contacts over the years.
Did you see him play when they were in California?
Yeah. Saw him play at Candlestick.
Fun.
Yeah.
Were you surprised at how good they were in 1970? Did that sort of come out of the blue, or I mean, did you have a sense that this team was on the cusp of greatness? Or I'm just curious because I was like 12, and I didn't. I'm not sure that I had a great sense, but they just came out of the gates so good that year.
Well, so no, I did not. I was, by the way, by that time I was teaching down in Louisville. And I was certainly following them and everything, but I had sort of, I had lost contact, but I wasn't that tuned into what was going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that 70 season, that 70-30 start, that's one of the best stretches for 100 games of any team ever.
Yeah.
I've always thought, man, it'd be an interesting book to do that 70-30 start that year. Because,
Let's do it.
Breaks, had to be a few great wins, few breaks along the way, but man, they were so good in that stretch.
Wayne Simpson.
Wayne Simpson.
Wayne Simpson.
Right. Wayne Simpson threw his arm out, never was great again. Yeah, and then that team just kind of ran down towards the end of the season. They got pretty well beat up. 71, that big physical win in 71. And in 72, they had another great year. They wound up in the World Series. 72, I know we're kind of running to the end of I'll tell you one other little quick story. I'm teaching school in Louisville in 72 playoffs. The Reds were down 2-1. They won Game 4. It's a 5-game playoff for the Pirates to get to the World Series. And the Reds won Game 4 to set up Game 5. And it was going to be like the next day. I mean, Game 4 was on a Tuesday and Game 5 was on a Wednesday or whatever. And I went to my principal I can't remember when they played the game or exactly what circumstances were, but anyway, I got a hold of my principal to say, I'm going to call in for a sub tomorrow. I heard there's tickets available for that Game 5, and I'm going to drive up to Cincinnati. And I figured he wouldn't mind because he was a big sports fan and stuff and everything. And not only did he not mind, he said, "Buy 2 extra. I'm going to get my kid out of school." So we ended up sitting in the first row in the green seats out in left field. That game was not a sellout, that Game 5. But to this day, that is the greatest Reds game I ever saw. That 9th inning comeback when Bench hit the home run. The place just went crazy. And looking back and listening back now to Al Michaels, you can let Al's call lives on. And it's such a great call because, he got so excited. He's screaming as the ball is going over the fence. And then it just shuts up for about 30 seconds and lets the crowd noise carry the emotion. It is a terrific call. And then he got the chance to do it all over again about 3 minutes later when the Reds scored the go-ahead run. But that's still my greatest experience going to a Reds game.
Well, it's such an odd video. You watch that, and you say it wasn't a sellout, but they still had blue seats out in right field for football, I think. And he hits that home run into this empty section of blue seats, and you think, where in the world are the fans? But I think they're there for the football season.
Well, they were, but there were, and I think if you go back and look, they were like in the low 40s, 42,000 maybe. I mean, that's a 50,000 foot, 50,000 capacity. I think they were down. Anyway, I know. I just remember hearing there were going to be tickets put on sale, and I drove up from Louisville that morning and got to the Riverfront box office and bought my four.
Wow, that's wild. Well, can we put you on? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh,
Okay, as the Reds historian, I'd like your all-time lineup.
whoa, all-time lineup. Well, I'll tell you, you're talking about the team of the '70s. I mean, it's like that. That makes it too easy. It's almost like you're really going to go not use any of the '70s guys, but I would. I mean, so you got bench, and I put Votto at first base and Joe Morgan at second base, and I put Barry at shortstop. Um, yeah, I put Pete at third, and then I'd have Frank Robinson and Eric Davis. Just throwing an old timer, Eddie Roush
There
from
you
from the old days.
go.
But anyway, yeah, you could win a lot of games with that team. And then pitching wise, I'll tell you, I loved. I mean, Rijo was great. He was probably one of the most consistent, best pitchers that I saw in sort of in my, early before I got to the Hall of Fame. Let's say the Reds Hall of Fame. Rijo was just such a terrific pitcher. When we inducted him into the Reds Hall of Fame, and of course we made the plaques, for the players, so the players all get a plaque to take home. And I realized that we'd been there all weekend, and I hadn't asked him. So I finally got, Jose, how do you like your, your plaque, your likeness on your plaque? And he said, I'm much better looking in person. Much better looking in person. But Rio would be on that list, and I'd take a couple of the old timers, Bucky Walters and
Derringer.
Derringer.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the late Don Gullett. I mean, that was a sad moment there for the Reds to lose Don. But Gullett, at his best, was awfully tough. He was awfully tough.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was. Well, they've had some good ones. Now, I was curious because there's a little bit of a debate about Perez or Votto, so I was just kind of curious, where you went there, and I think that's a pretty solid choice. I think Joe.
Yeah, I was wondering where you were going to put Pete. Right field, second base. He can't be at second base, obviously.
The Reds had one other great third baseman, and that was Heine Groh back, and then again, way back, teens and 20s. He was really, really good. He played with Eddie Roush, that 1-2 combination. They were really very good. Groh had a shot at, he had Hall of Fame credentials 40, 50 years ago. Not anymore. Like you could have looked at him as a Hall of Famer. It's too bad he couldn't be a Hall of Famer, because then people don't know him now, but you'd sort of know who he was.
Greg, do you think Joey will make it into the National Baseball Hall of Fame on the first ballot or a later ballot?
I think he'll be in the 60% mark. I'm going to guess on the first ballot. I think he's a second or third year guy. But yeah, he'll make it. I don't think there's any question he'll make it.
That's great. Yeah, we went up. I took my two sons in 2000 for the induction of Tony Perez and Sparky Anderson, and we said we were going to come back for the next Red. And so when Larkin got inducted, my son Joe, of all things, picked that weekend to get married. So we were unable to make our trip.
You couldn't attend the wedding, Jack?
I was on the fence. It was tough, but I stayed back for the wedding. So we need Votto to get in. So.
Yeah, well, you don't have any more weddings coming up, do you?
Well, we got one in April, but Votto's got a few years to wait. Yeah. And it's just something about. I mean, we could have gone up for Roland, or we could have gone up for Junior, but it's. I thought it was really one of the most interesting things when we went to Cooperstown. It was just unbelievable. I mean, it was just such a great trip and such a good time. But Sparky was such a almost everybody you ran into, not everybody, but were either from Cincinnati because they came up, they wanted to see Sparky, they wanted to see Tony. Carlton Fisk got inducted that weekend too. ton of people from Boston. And it just was funny to me because, Sparky really managed longer for the Tigers than he did for the Reds, almost double. And Fisk actually played for the White Sox longer than he ever played for the Red Sox. But there was just something about the fan connection with Sparky in Cincinnati and Fisk in Boston that it just transcended. It was just really fascinating.
Well, we have our corollary a little bit with that with Frank Robinson. And Frank had such a bad separation from the Reds. There were so many of our feelings.
Yeah.
I don't even think when Frank went in the Hall of Fame would have been around 1980, I suppose, roughly. I don't think the Reds sent anybody.
Oh, really?
Granted, he wanted to go in as an Oriole. And by that time, it's all new ownership and it's all new people. But I don't think we sent anybody to the induction. But it's interesting. I mean, had he gone in with Reds cap, then I suppose, we all. And I still think of him as a Red in the Hall of Fame. I mean, if I make a list of Reds Hall of Famers, he's on a list.
For sure.
But you're right. He just sort of let go of the Cincinnati connection. He didn't. Yeah. And in fact, when we started the Hall of Fame here in Cincinnati, it was the Reds Hall of Fame. I remember calling out to see, because we didn't have a lot of stuff. We needed stuff. And so we were calling around asking the players, not as donations, but just if they'd loan us, things. And the family was not, I had never talked to Frank about it, just talked to his daughters, I think. But actually, she said, no, that's not going to happen. But she said, don't feel bad. You won't loan stuff to Cooperstown either.
Well, hey, Greg, we're running up against our time. This has been a
Right.
fantastic conversation. Hopefully, we'll do it again sometime if you're willing to come back.
A lot of Reds history, a lot of great stuff to talk about. And you guys do a great job. And I really think this is a terrific little podcast idea. And I'll look forward to seeing it as the year goes on.
All
And
right.
especially this year. Huh? I mean,
Yeah.
I put you guys on the spot. How many games are we going to win this year? Are we in the playoffs?
Yeah. I'd say yes. I say yes. I say 87 wins. And we get
I'm
in.
going to say 95, Greg.
Whoa.
I love it. I love to hear it.
I'm an optimist.
That's on opening day at the ballpark.
All right.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Another standing ovation.
Yeah. You get past one left.
All right. Thanks, Greg.